My name is Reagan Whitmore, and I'm 25 years old. The night my sister humiliated me at my parents' anniversary, I learned something brutal family can break you in ways strangers never could. The applause was loud, glasses were clinking, and laughter filled the room like nothing bad had ever existed. But I remember standing there, frozen, feeling like I was slowly disappearing in a crowd that was supposed to love me. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped being their daughter and started becoming someone they would regret losing. We grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside: white walls, trim hedges, a father who was respected, and a mother who smiled for everyone. But inside, it was always divided. There was my older sister, Vanessa, and then there was me. Vanessa was the golden child, the one with perfect grades, perfect manners, and a laugh that made people adore her instantly. And then there was me, always a little too quiet, a little too emotional, a little too inconvenient. I learned early on that love in our house wasn't equal, it was earned, and I was always falling short. I still remember being 12 years old, holding up a report card with straight A's, just hoping for a moment of recognition. My father barely glanced at it before asking where Vanessa was. My mother smiled, but it wasn't for me, it never was. "That's good, Reagan," she said casually, like I had just told her the weather. Minutes later, Vanessa walked in, and suddenly the room lit up. "That's my girl," my father said, pulling her into a hug I had spent years chasing. I stood there, invisible again, learning my place without anyone having to say out loud. Vanessa didn't just enjoy the attention, she thrived on it. And slowly, over the years, she learned how to keep it. Every compliment she received came at my expense. Every success of hers was somehow tied to my failure. "Reagan's just not as driven," she would say with a soft smile, like she was defending me, not diminishing me. And my parents, they believed her. They always did. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to prove myself. In their eyes, I was always the background character in Vanessa's story. By the time I turned 20, I stopped trying to compete. I moved out, built my own life, and created distance not just physically, but emotionally. I got a job, paid my own bills, and learned how to survive without waiting for their approval. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not fully, but at least I wasn't constantly being compared, corrected, or quietly dismissed. So when my parents invited me to their 30th anniversary, I hesitated. Something in me told me not to go, like a quiet warning I couldn't explain. But another part of me, the part that still hoped, still believed things could be different, said maybe this time would be better. Maybe time had changed them. Maybe I had changed enough to finally be seen. So I bought a dress, showed up with a polite smile, and stepped back into a world I thought I had left behind. The moment I walked into the venue, I knew nothing had changed. Vanessa was already there, glowing in a way that made people turn their heads. She hugged our parents like she belonged there, like she owned the space. And when her eyes landed on me, she smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was something sharper, something familiar. "You actually came," she said softly, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. I forced a smile, ignoring the way my chest tightened. I should have listened to that feeling. I really should have, because that night wasn't about celebration. It was about something else entirely, and I didn't realize it yet. But I was walking straight into it. The evening unfolded like a carefully rehearsed performance, and I felt like the only one who hadn't been given a script. Guests moved gracefully across the garden, laughing, complimenting the decor, reminiscing about my parents' perfect marriage. I stayed near the edges, offering polite smiles, answering questions I didn't want to answer. Every time someone mentioned Vanessa, their eyes lit up like they were talking about someone extraordinary. And every time they looked at me, it was different, curious, distant, almost pitying. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself to just get through the night. Vanessa of course, was everywhere. She floated between groups effortlessly, her laughter rising above the music, her presence impossible to ignore. I watched as she held my mother's hand, whispering something that made her laugh. I watched my father place his arm proudly around her shoulders, introducing her to guests like she was his greatest achievement. Not once did he look around for me. Not once did anyone ask where I had been all these years. It was like I had never left, and somehow, I had never existed either. At one point, I stepped inside the house just to breathe. The noise outside had become too much, too suffocating. I stood in the hallway, staring at old family photos hanging on the walls, frames filled with memories I barely recognized. There were pictures of birthdays, vacations, milestones, most of them centered around Vanessa. I found one of me, tucked awkwardly in the corner of a collage, half covered by another frame. I laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Still invisible, I whispered to myself, the words tasting bitter. When I returned outside, the mood had shifted, the music softened, and people began gathering closer to the stage set up near the center of the garden. My father tapped his glass, calling for attention, his voice full of pride and emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, smiling at the crowd. I stood at the back again, instinctively retreating to where I felt safest and seen. He spoke about love, about commitment, about building a life together. And then, as expected, he called Vanessa up to say a few words. She walked up with confidence, her heels clicking against the wooden platform, her smile perfectly placed. "I just want to say how lucky I am to have parents like you," she began, her voice soft but clear. The crowd melted instantly. She spoke about childhood memories, about family values, about how much she admired them. It was all so polished, so convincing. I almost believed it myself. And then, halfway through her speech, she paused and looked directly at me. "I think moments like this really show what kind of children parents raise," she continued, her tone shifting just slightly. "Some of us carry those values forward, and some of us choose a different path." There was a ripple of quiet confusion in the crowd. My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. I had heard it my entire life. She wasn't done. Not even close. "I mean, we all know not everyone turns out the same, right?" she added lightly, a small laugh escaping her lips as her eyes stayed locked on mine. A few people chuckled, unsure, hesitant. I felt the ground beneath me shift, like something inside me was preparing to collapse. My heart started pounding, loud enough that I could barely hear anything else. She tilted her head slightly, pretending to be thoughtful. "Take Reagan, for example," she said, my name cutting through the air like a blade. The entire crowd turned, every single face. And just like that, I was no longer invisible. I stood there, frozen, as the spotlight she had created settled directly on me. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The moment my name left her lips, something inside me snapped into a strange, quiet awareness. It was like time slowed down just enough for me to feel every pair of eyes locking onto me, every whisper forming before it was even spoken. Vanessa stood there, poised and smiling, like she was about to deliver a harmless joke. But I knew her too well. This wasn't harmless. This was calculated. "Reagan has always done things differently," she continued, her voice gentle, almost sympathetic. "She left home, cut herself off, and chose a life that none of us really understand." A few people nodded. Others leaned in, hungry for more. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't move. I didn't defend myself, not yet, because something in her tone told me she wasn't finished. And if I reacted too early, I would lose whatever control I had left. "I mean, we tried to support her," Vanessa added, glancing at our parents, who stood there silently, not correcting her, not stopping her. "But you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped." That was the moment the murmurs began, soft, subtle, but loud enough for me to hear. Judgment wrapped in curiosity, assumptions forming in real time. And still, I stood there, feeling every word land like a quiet bruise. Then she took a step further, Some people just don't value family the same way, she said, her eyes narrowing just slightly. They walk away, chase independence, and forget who stood by them. The irony almost made me laugh, but it stayed trapped in my chest, heavy and bitter. My hands clenched at my sides, nails pressing into my skin, grounding me, because if I didn't hold onto something, I might fall apart right there in front of everyone, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. But then came the twist I hadn't expected. She smiled again, softer this time, like she was about to offer kindness. But despite everything, she said, we still love her. We always will. The crowd relaxed. A few even clapped lightly, thinking the moment had turned into something heartfelt. But I saw it for what it was, a performance. A perfectly crafted narrative where she was the understanding sister, the devoted daughter, and I was the broken, ungrateful one. And the worst part, my parents said nothing, not a single word to correct it, not a single glance in my direction. That silence hurt more than anything she said. I could feel something rising inside me then, not anger, not exactly, something deeper. Years of swallowed words, ignored efforts, quiet sacrifices, all pressing against the surface. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace, trying to be the better person, trying to prove I was worthy of being seen. But standing there, under their judgment, I realized something devastatingly clear. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the version of me that made Vanessa look better. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wanting their approval. I took a slow step forward, the gravel crunching softly beneath my heels, and the sound alone was enough to shift the energy. Conversations died instantly. Vanessa's smile flickered, just for a second, like she hadn't expected me to move. I walked closer to the stage, my heart still racing, but my face calm, because this wasn't panic anymore. This was clarity, and once you see things clearly, you can't unsee them. I looked up at her, really looked this time, and for a brief moment, I saw something behind her confidence. Not guilt, not regret, just anticipation, like she was waiting to see if I would break the way I always had before, if I would shrink, apologize, or walk away quietly. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't going to play my role, and neither was she ready for what came next. I stopped just a few feet from the stage, close enough for everyone to see my face clearly, close enough for Vanessa to realize I wasn't backing down. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, like the entire evening was holding its breath. Then I smiled, small, controlled, nothing like hers. You're right, Vanessa, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I did leave. I did choose a different life. A few people shifted, unsure where this was going. And for the first time that night, I had their full attention. I took another step closer, my eyes never leaving hers. But since we're sharing stories, I continued softly, let's tell the whole truth. Her expression tightened, just slightly, but it was enough. I turned my gaze briefly toward our parents, who suddenly looked less confident, less composed. You said I walked away from family, I said, letting the words settle. What you didn't mention is why. The crowd leaned in again, curiosity sharpening into something more focused now. This wasn't a speech anymore. This was something real, something raw. I left because I was tired of being invisible, I said, my voice still calm, but heavier now. I left because no matter what I did, it was never enough, not compared to you. A few heads turned toward Vanessa. I saw it, the shift, the first crack in her perfect image. I got into the same college you did, I added, glancing at my father. But you told me we couldn't afford it. A week after paying her full tuition, my father's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Of course he did. He always did when it mattered most. Vanessa let out a small laugh, trying to regain control. Reagan, this isn't the time, she started. But I cut her off, gently but firmly. No, this is exactly the time, I said. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The truth carried enough weight on its own. You told everyone I didn't want help, I continued. What you didn't say is that the only help ever offered came with conditions: be quieter, be better, be more like you. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder now, no longer sympathetic toward her, but questioning. I reached into my clutch, my fingers steady despite the storm inside me. And since we're talking about who values family, I said, pulling out a folded document, maybe we should talk about the business. That got their attention instantly, especially my father's. His eyes widened, just slightly, and that was all I needed to know. Vanessa's smile faltered again, this time more visibly. You didn't think I knew, did you? I asked quietly. About the loan, about the risk, about what you put this entire family on the line for? The crowd fell into a deeper silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. I held up the paper just enough for it to be seen, not read, letting the tension build. You told everyone I abandoned this family, I said, my voice firm now. But the truth is, I was the one you called when things started falling apart. My father looked away. My mother's face had gone pale. Vanessa didn't speak at all. I was the one who fixed it, I added, the words landing slowly, deliberately, quietly, without applause, without recognition. I let that sit for a moment before taking a breath, the final piece settling into place. You humiliated me tonight to protect your image, I said, meeting Vanessa's eyes one last time. But you forgot something important. I paused, just long enough for everyone to feel it. I don't need your version of me anymore. And in that moment, everything shifted. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before it. No music, no laughter, no polite applause, just the quiet collapse of an illusion that had been carefully maintained for years. I looked around and saw it in their faces, the realization settling in piece by piece. The perfect family they had been celebrating just minutes ago wasn't real. Vanessa stood frozen, her confidence gone, her expression caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. For the first time in her life, she didn't have control of the narrative. And for the first time in mine, I didn't need to fight for a voice. I already had it. My father was the first to move, stepping forward like he wanted to say something, anything to regain authority over the moment. Reagan, this isn't appropriate, he said, his voice lower now, less certain. I almost smiled at that. Appropriate. That word had been used my entire life to keep me quiet, to keep me small. It wasn't appropriate when she humiliated me either, I replied calmly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out this time, because deep down, he knew I was right, and knowing it was worse than hearing it. My mother tried next, her voice trembling with something that sounded like concern, but felt like fear. We can talk about this privately, she said, stepping closer, her hand slightly raised like she might touch me. I stepped back before she could, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to make a point. We've had private conversations my entire life, I said softly. That's the problem. Everything real was always hidden. Her hand dropped slowly, her eyes filling with something I might have once called guilt. But it was too late for that now. Way too late. Vanessa finally found her voice. But it wasn't the one she started the night with. It was sharper, defensive, stripped of its polish. You're twisting everything, she said quickly, her words rushing out like she was trying to outrun the truth. You always do this, you play the victim. I let out a quiet breath. Not angry, not hurt, just done. No, I said, shaking my head slightly. I just stopped pretending. That hit harder than anything else I had said. I saw it in the way her expression cracked, the way her eyes flickered with something she couldn't hide anymore. I looked at all of them, then my parents, my sister, the people who had spent years defining who I was allowed to be. And I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. Clean, sharp, undeniable clarity. I didn't come here for revenge, I said, my voice steady, grounded. I came here hoping something had changed. I paused, letting the truth settle between us. But now I understand. It never will, No one interrupted this time. No one tried to fix it. Because there was nothing left to fix, I placed the folded document gently on the edge of the stage. Not as a threat, not as leverage, just as proof that I had nothing left to prove. You don't get access to me anymore, I continued, my tone final, but not cruel. Not my life, not my time, not my silence. My father's face tightened, my mother's eyes filled, and Vanessa just stared, because this wasn't a scene they could control. This wasn't a version of me they could rewrite. This was the end of something they had always assumed would last forever. I turned away then, not waiting for a response, not needing one. Each step felt lighter than the last, like I was finally putting down a weight I didn't realize I had been carrying for years. No dramatic exit, no tears, no looking back, just a quiet decision made out loud. And as I walked out of that garden, leaving behind the lights, the whispers, and the people who never truly saw me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's walking away and never giving them the chance to hurt you again.